I'm going to tell you, just count down to 10 and then you should be good to go.
Okay.
Live. Go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Matthew Motion, and I am president of Brotherhood of Temple Beth-El. Welcome to our annual rabbinic dialogue featuring Rabbi Dale Polikoff of Great Neck Synagogue, Rabbi Howard Stecker of Temple Israel, and Rabbis Tara and Meir Feldman of Temple Beth-El of Great Neck. Welcome also to my fellow Brotherhood members and members of the respective men's groups who have sponsored this morning's dialogue. Thank you all for coming this morning to this annual community event, where we can carve out our own little corner of the internet as friends, neighbors, and as fellow Jews to discuss the important issues facing us today. Our annual panel discussion, initiated by the men's clubs of our 3 congregations, among others, has continued for over 30 years and has seen various combinations of rabbis come and go. Discussions, usually featuring a nice bagel breakfast in our respective synagogues, are always lively and informative. I am quite hopeful that next year we'll be able to sit together side by side, eat bagels, and hear from our rabbis live and in person. This past year has seen extraordinary challenges, and for many of us, great personal loss. Temple life has been severely hampered as a year's worth of events were wiped off the calendar. However, I believe that through our response to the COVID crisis and struggles to maintain a sense of comforting normalcy through various streaming technologies, we have found opportunities previously unavailable. We have learned that physical distance or infirmity is no longer an obstacle to attending Shabbat services, a Sunday morning lecture, or a grandchild's B'nai Mitzvah. Mind you, I'm as tired as anyone at staring at a screen all the time, but for some in our congregations, that screen connects them to a more active Jewish life. This morning, we will hear what our rabbis have to say about their experiences the past year and how we and the rest of the Jewish people move forward. Our dialogue will consist of 2 questions for the panel, each taking approximately 20 minutes. After that, I will pose to them questions from the audience, but only questions posted in the chat room. Please feel free to post questions while the dialogue is in process. I will do my best to relay them to the panel. Thanks again for coming, and we will now begin the dialogue. So my first question to the panelists.
Matt, before you go,
Yes.
give me a moment. I want to share a thought or two,
Sure.
and then I'll bring it back to you. Okay. I want to open by expressing to our rabbis, Rabbi Polikoff and Rabbi Stecker, who personally I consider true and genuine friends and teachers. It really is an honor to share this rabbinic dialogue with you both, and for Temple Beth-El to host this virtual experience. Rabbi Tara, life partner, it's an honor and even more a joy to be in the same room with you, to be snuggling shoulders with you in our beautiful Rudin Chapel together. To our Temple Beth-El family, and Matt, to you as the head of our TBE Brotherhood, and to the brotherhoods and men's clubs of Temple Israel and Great Neck Synagogue. To you all who every year help to make this happen, a huge, huge thank you to you all. Matt, that was a perfect open and introduction. I really am grateful to you as always. I think we all agree that this has been a most challenging year, maybe the most challenging year that any of us has ever experienced. None of us have experienced a pandemic before COVID-19. None of us have ever lost before our ability to see grandchildren or grandparents or children, siblings, friends, or even spouses. This has been a year like no other. A bitter and divisive presidential election, lies repeated over and over about that election, an economy that has caused so much pain and brought so much fear, mass shootings, Thursday being the most recent in Indianapolis. So many of the victims are people with black and brown skin, a dangerous and scary rise in anti-Semitism, an insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th, led by white nationalists. 3 million people around the world, including almost 570,000 Americans, have died at the hands of COVID-19. But there's also much about which to be hopeful. Of course, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, hopefully AstraZeneca and J&J will again be in the pipeline and vaccinating thousands and thousands of people. Because of how its incredible success in vaccinating the country, Israel at this moment is the envy of the world. Many of us are blessed to have been vaccinated. Our economy is improving. We can pray together again. We can visit with each other. We can travel again. Each of us, Matt, as you pointed out, each of us has our own personal story, our list of losses and worries, the fears we've been carrying around. Some of us have gone through life-changing experiences, valve replacement surgery, plans to move to Israel. Others of us have worried terribly during this COVID year about a child in serious need of medical care, and others have been prevented from visiting family in Israel. There's many stories as the number of us who are present. And so we will share these stories and insights guided by our president of the Brotherhood, Matt Motion. So Matt, if I can ask you to pick up where you were about to lead us before I interrupted you.
Okay. So the first question for the panel is simply, how has the past year affected you personally and professionally? And anyone may start.
Maybe not a Feldman. We've occupied some airtime, so.
Yeah, good point.
Oh, not both Feldmans.
So maybe being the oldest rabbi on the screen.
Vote hurrah.
I hope you don't mind if I maybe jump in first.
Me too, Rabbi Polakov.
Just again, a word of gratitude to Temple Beth-El for hosting this morning's program and for putting it together in a safe and secure way. Something to teach us all a little bit about how we live in this virtual world, which can sometimes be a dangerous world as well. And a special shout out to my colleagues. Wonderful to have all of them here, physically in good health. And in Yirtzeh Hashem, we should be able to come together for many, many years to come. I'd like to talk about some of the ways in which this past year's pandemic has impacted on me, both personally, but also from a professional, congregational point of view. So two ideas, if I can, from a personal perspective. We are, thank God, blessed with children living in Israel, and we have not been able to get to see them for the past year. We usually see them at least once, if not twice a year. We have grandchildren who are living there, and the inability to go to see them has, for me, made the consideration of being a citizen of the state of Israel even more significant. Thank God we have children who are pretty much local as well. And although we couldn't sit with them, we could nevertheless see them. We could drive by, we could stand around outside, we could sit around outside and talk. In the warm weather of last summer, we were able to do that. Thank God now we're able to get together in a more physical sense, without some of the trappings of the pandemic that were there earlier. But our family in Israel were really off limits to us, and that to me drove home a particular vulnerability. I always considered Israel a second home, and I always considered myself like a resident, as belonging to that second home. And it was a little bit of a wake-up call to me that although I might see Israel as a second home, Israel doesn't necessarily see me as a citizen of that second home. So that was one of the ways in which this distance impacted on me. and made me even more appreciative of my colleagues, of Rabbis Tara and Rabbi Meir, who are ultimately making their home in Israel. So one particular way that the pandemic impacted on me. A second personal element here is the element of a real human frailty, vulnerability, and a spiritual moment. And I know that many who are watching and many in our community, and hopefully many more, are already vaccinated or planning on getting vaccinated. And I will tell you that that moment of the first vaccine was a moment of tremendous emotionality for me. Literally brought tears to my eyes, and not from the discomfort of the needle, but from the sense of look at what we as a society are able to accomplish, how dangerous the place the world can be, and how God gave us the ability to try to make that place a little bit less dangerous. There was a discussion among many of my colleagues as to whether or not there was a bracha, a blessing that should be said when getting the vaccine. And indeed, there were many who thought that there should be such a blessing acknowledging not only the individual benefit, but the communal benefit as well as this special moment. But it was a very emotional moment to me, highlighted just how frail and fragile and vulnerable we can be, and also how far we're able to come using the gifts that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that God gave us. A moment, if I can speak about congregationally as well. I want to echo what Matt and what Rabbi Meir said a little bit earlier about the benefits of Zoom, although I am sure that I am as tired of Zoom as are all of you. And Zoom has been a wonderful thing. Many wonderful things we've been able to learn from it. Zoom has allowed me, as I'm sure my colleagues, to expand the reach of our classes. It has allowed us to be able to bring classes and programs to people of limited mobility, people with health concerns, people who wouldn't be able necessarily to join us. And even during the week, when we allow people through Zoom to virtually participate, and that has some limitations from a halachic perspective in our davening, the one thing that we don't have is Zoom on Shabbos or Zoom on Yom Tov. On Shabbat and Yom Tov, we don't use Zoom. We don't use Zoom, obviously, for halachic reasons. And I know that some of my colleagues feel differently about that, and perhaps we can talk about that this morning, but we don't use Zoom. And there has been a tremendous benefit to not using Zoom on Shabbat, not using Zoom on Yom Tov. Obviously, we can't use it, but there's been a benefit from that. And the benefit from that has been to reinforce the brick and mortar building of the synagogue as the center of Jewish life when we're able to be there. For many weeks, we weren't able to be there. And like all of you, we prayed from home. But once we were able to be there again, and once we figured out how to be able to be there and be in compliance with the rules and the regulations and the safety protocols, it reminded us of just how central this building, which houses our minyanim, houses all of our ability to come together and pray as a Jewish community, just how important that building is, how important that building was, and how important that building and what it represents will continue to be. We are, thank God, bursting at the seams. I'm anxiously waiting for New York State to change its 6 feet distance of social separation so people can be a little bit closer in shul. But I think we have come to learn and appreciate even more the special importance of this shul, of this facility. So for me personally and professionally, it's been a profound year. I yield the floor to my colleagues.
Okay. Rabbi Stecker, you want to go?
Sure. echoing just the gratitude for being here, for having colleagues and friends that make even the most difficult moments bearable, and to the Temple Beth-El community for hosting us this year. So I'll start with the personal. The word vulnerability that Rabbi Polikoff spoke of definitely resonates for me. This was a year for me of feeling vulnerable, vulnerable to perhaps appreciate the joyful moments, even in a more profound way, and vulnerable also to just the dangers that we confront. So being specific, so we had two of our children living with us for a number of months, and within the space of a month, two things happened. One is that we dropped one of our sons off at the hospital because he was experiencing some residual pain from a surgery that he had had a few years ago. And it turns out that he needed another surgery, and he's now, thank God, fine. There is something very, very frightening about dropping your child off at the hospital and saying, text us when you know what's going on. By comparison, the first time that he had his surgery, we were there with him. We said, goodbye to him and wished him well as he was being wheeled away. And we saw him as soon as he recovered. And here we were FaceTiming him and saying, okay, what's going on and what's happening, and relying on all of that. So that was very jarring, very difficult. And I know as I'm saying this, that story in some form or fashion is a story that is not unfamiliar to many of us having experienced the difficulties of life, which are always there, augmented, magnified by the realities of COVID. So weeks later, we stood with another of our sons under the chuppah in the backyard of his now wife's parents' home. And they asked me to officiate, which was very nice, and I was very happy to do so, and put together a chuppah that they built with materials from Home Depot. I can assure you, this was not the chuppah that they would have had if we had gone ahead with the plan A, which was more lavish. There were far fewer people who were there. There was something so exquisitely precious and beautiful about that wedding. I don't think, and I've asked them, that they have any misgivings other than they wish that they could have shared with more people, but about going ahead with that. So just as there was a vulnerability in saying farewell to a child and wishing them the best in that trying circumstance, there was also a vulnerability to standing under a chuppah that was put together in the simplest way, with the closest people to us, milling about before, just chatting and schmoozing and just enjoying the incredible love that the two of them have for each other. So I share both of those because that was part of our lives. That was the soundtrack of our lives. And so I want to move from that to the professional. It's hard to disentangle for me because so much of what I was doing professionally was being responsive to people in their times of need and helping people to find ways to celebrate their celebrations, as we all do. And one thing that I just want to underscore is that this was a year that required tremendous adaptive leadership all the time. So we did go to a virtual platform, which we used every day. And I would say that there was benefit to being able to bring our community together each day, including Shabbat and holidays, through virtual means. Now we're trying to determine the hybrid. We have had services in person, we've had it inside, outside. We're inviting people to participate, and we're also streaming it virtually. And that's a challenge, and it's difficult for people to find their space. Where do they want to be? Where are they most comfortable being? And so this will be part of our growth moving forward. But I want to also just say that a certain amount of adaptive leadership is healthy, but when every single thing requires, how are we going to do this? Who's going to come? Let's talk to the health committee. It's exhausting. And I just want to briefly underscore an article that I read by Dr. Betsy Stone, who is a psychologist who's worked with the Hebrew Union College community, that Jewish professionals are experiencing burnout. We're not the only ones. I think most professionals are, most people are, but to have to exert adaptive leadership for everything that prior to this situation would have just been, yeah, this is how we do it, is very tiring. For people to be relying upon us for maintaining the integrity and the viability of our institutions and responding in difficult times and managing the insecurities and the anxieties that we all have is very tiring. So before I yield the floor, there was some talk that we might share, a verse that we find meaningful. So I'm going to share a verse from the Psalms, which is Mi ma'amakim karaticha Adonai. The psalmist says, I call out to God from the depths. And I think a lot of us are trying to call out from our depths. And that's a hard place to be. And I would urge us to listen tenderly to each other and to even ask each other how we're doing and to really listen for the answers, because what I've just shared, I know I'm not the only one who has had similar experiences. And if I just might, a verse from a contemporary source, which is the song Rain on Me by Lady Gaga and Ariana Grande. I'd rather be dry, but at least I'm alive. Rain on me. So life is not easy, but it's good to be alive.
Amen. Beautiful.
Thank you, Rabbi Stecker. So I think I'll lean in for this first question and may or maybe a little bit more for the second one. So personally and professionally, how have we been affected? On a personal note, I think our COVID experience, not that we're at the absolute end of it, but it's sort of been bookended by medical events. Most recently, Mayor's heart valve replacement, thank God. Yes, I can completely, how do you just put someone in a hospital and wave as they go off to do this? How do you have an ICU Seder with your husband while you're at your dining room table and he's in a very different situation? So there was that at the end. And actually just before the world shut down, I had a very close call with meningitis that almost took my life. But I went to the hospital thinking maybe it could be COVID. And that's why I'm here. So there's just an interesting heightened awareness to all of our shared mortality, echoing what has been said. Personal and professional, as I think Rabbi Stecker, you just said, there's never been an easy way for us to tease those out. The bima in which we're sitting now is the one that at least our youngest crawled around on Shabbat services. A married couple on the bima. Our work is our calling. My Judaism defines my family. So it's all inextricably linked. So the pandemic has deeply affected both. For me, certainly not to be able to have access to our son on the other side of the ocean in Israel. We've been able to navigate that for many months now, and I maternally hit a wall for my ability to withstand that anymore. And I think the impact that the pandemic has had on me, both personally and professionally, is that it has made me realize that I don't know how much time I have. I hope I have so many more years of great health and tons of energy, but it's been a moment of asking myself, okay, what are my true priorities given what time I may have? And that has put in stronger relief for me the need to lean into the needs of my nuclear family. I think it's always been Israel is the retirement plan, and we're going to finish this incredible career here, and then we're going to do that. And I feel a kind of urgency that if I am truly saying that I want to be able to sit with my children and grandchildren at a Shabbat table in Jerusalem, I may not have infinite time to make that happen. And so in what has probably been the hardest decision of our lives, I'll certainly say for my life, to make the decision to, in a year's time, leave for Israel in the height of my career, with an irreplaceable and beautiful community that is everything we've dreamed of. That has been prompted by COVID. The quote, the text that I'll bring is from Brachot Talmud. It's Da lifnei miata omed. Know before whom you stand. And I feel myself standing with very stark awareness in front of my mortality, and knowing the impact of my choices. And so that's my answer to the first question.
I'm going to be very brief, but I just want to add one small impact from this year that links the personal and the professional, and it's almost trite, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's actually deep and meaningful, at the risk of being trite, which is like the loss of the ability to hug has. I wish there was some. You rabbis are really smart. Maybe can you think of like some instrument that can measure the impact? How do we measure that, quantify it? Like literally, mamish, like it has an effect every time it's actually, what was the movie that, Monsters, Inc., where they measured the impact of a laugh. Anyway, I'm just riffing at the moment, but is there a way to measure the loss of the ability to hug, which of course is made so profoundly clear? Rabbi Polikoff, you're separated from your family in Israel. Rabbi Stecker, from your son in the hospital. For me, in addition to these very intimate, the most intimate family experiences, hugging congregants, I haven't really figured out how to measure the impact, but it feels very, very real. So I'm grateful to each of you for your very deep and heartfelt and thoughtful answers to question number one.
Matt, guide us. Question number two.
Don't you just love Zoom?
Where's
I'm
Matt?
happy to offer it.
Where's Matt?
Okay.
Maybe we should just jump in.
That's fine.
Wait, no, I'm here. Sorry.
Great, go
That's
for it.
okay.
Yeah, I was unmuted. I was muted. I apologize. No, I wanted to say, before I ask the second question, I just wanted to say, kind of on behalf of everyone who is, hidden behind the webinar, that we certainly, have a great deal of sympathy, and it's extremely moving to hear your three stories, which I'm sure are reflected throughout the attendees, myself included. And thank you for sharing those very moving experiences and remembrances. Moving this to the second question, which hopefully we can talk about, moving forward. So the question is, looking ahead to a post-COVID world, what do you think will be different moving forward for our families, our synagogues, and the Jewish people? How will, in the synagogue or shul, will Jewish life be less relevant? Will it be more relevant? Rabbi Polikoff, you talked a bit about this, what you've learned from the experience. So maybe you can go ahead and start again with your thoughts.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I'm gonna begin. I saved my text for the second half, simply because I wasn't going to compete with Lady Gaga. But the pasuk, the text that I would like to share with you is actually a verse from this coming week's Torah reading of the double portions of Acharei, Mos, and Kiddushim. And it talks about something which I think most people sort of gloss over when they read it, but something that has profound implications for me that I'll share with you. The Torah tells us in Parshas Kiddushim that when you come into the land, and you plant a fruit-bearing tree, so then for the first 3 years, the fruit is forbidden. And in the 4th year, the fruit needs to be eaten in Jerusalem. Has some very interesting ramifications, very interesting implications. Does it apply? Certainly applies in Israel. Does it apply in Great Neck? Maybe it applies in Kings Point, but doesn't apply in other areas of Great Neck. However, there's some certain implications. But I'll tell you what it means to me. What it means to me is that God is teaching us patience. And that has a profound meaning for me as we move forward. I am as anxious as anyone else to get back to a normal life. But the message of this kind of patience is something that I think we need to take with us. That it's not going to happen tomorrow, and it's not going to happen the day after tomorrow. And as much as we are vaccinated and we consider ourselves relatively safe, there are variants, there are boosters that are going to be coming out. We're not tomorrow going to get back to Kiddush as it used to be. And lest we kid ourselves as rabbis thinking that people are coming to shul for our drashos, for our sermons, I think we understand that even more than that, they're coming for the social interaction and for the kiddushes. And those are not going to happen right away. It's going to take some time. We're going to need to have patience. And as we move forward in this period of transition, I want to share with you some of the hopes that I have moving forward and taking with us. Interestingly, the organization that represents synagogues of the Orthodox movement is primarily the Orthodox Union. Which we refer to as the OU, and probably has an important place in many of your kitchens as well. The OU recently put out a grant request for creative ideas to get people to come back to shul. What does it mean to get people to come back to shul? So for many Orthodox communities, it means to lure people away from the backyard minyanim that they started, during the pandemic. It's very nice. It's very intimate. It's in someone's backyard. There's no drasha. The service is quicker. There's probably a lavish illegal kiddush afterwards. And how do you bring people back to the synagogue, back to the building, which from my perspective is the mothership? And I think there's an element of recognizing the importance of community in bringing people back. But I don't kid myself, and I think the lay leadership of our shul is in the same category, that there are going to be people who are not going to be coming back. People who are not going to be coming back because they fell off the wagon of shul. They fell out of the routine of going to shul. I can pray at home with a cup of coffee and maybe do what in my mind seems to be the same thing, but it's really not. I think one of our efforts moving forward needs to be directed to getting people back to shul, increasing that sense of community, trying to minimize the divisiveness of separate minyanim that go on in the community. I think the key to that, actually, believe it or not, is the children. That is what's keeping many people away from shul. And that is that shul was an experience that you could come to as a family, and there would be something for your children to do. I don't know about my colleagues, but in our synagogue, there's really nothing for the children to do now, and we are not encouraging children to come. We do have some very minimal youth programming, but the majority of our children we're not encouraging to come, and that's really tough for a family. So I'm hopeful that as we have the patience to transition out of this pandemic, that we will be able to reinstitute the programming for the children and bring everybody back to shul. And obviously, we don't have unlimited time, but as much as we talk about the personal and professional challenges that COVID has been for us, one whole element that we're missing is what it's meant for our children. Right? What is it meant for our children to not be in school or to do school virtually? How many of them have literally lost a year of education from their lives? And what are the long-term ramifications of that? What does it mean to not be able to sit in class, or even to sit in class and to sit behind plexiglass or to wear a mask? It's a whole separate element of what we have to grapple with. I anticipate continuing to use Zoom moving forward for the reason that all of my colleagues have discussed. I don't think that I'm ever going to go back to just giving a class in a room with 20 people in it or 25 people in it, or having a program for that matter in a room with 150 people in it, because the reach of Zoom, and one of the articles which I read recently talked about how the pandemic accelerated our growth into the digital virtual arena by at least 10 years. But it's there to stay. And we're going to figure out some way of using it as a hybrid model to have both in-person classes and people participating by Zoom, in-person programming and people participating by Zoom. So I think that is something that's going to continue. Unfortunately, I'll tell you something that I'm worried about, and that is that God created us in such a phenomenal way and gave us the power of forgetting things. As I get older, that power becomes a little bit more pronounced. After surgery, Rabbi Meir, it's even more pronounced for a little while. But we're gonna, I think that we're gonna forget what it was like not to be in shul. And we're going to forget what it was like when we first came back to shul, and shul was so quiet, right? Nobody was talking, right? Nobody was walking around schmoozing. Nobody was discussing politics or sports or whatever. People were sitting 6 feet apart from each other and simply praying. So I think we're going to lose a little bit of that element when they come back. But quite frankly, for at least the first Shabbos, when we can sit near each other and not have to wear masks, I'm going to appreciate the talking. The second Shabbos, I'll say something about it. But the first Shabbos, I'm certainly going to appreciate that talking. And my final observation is that, chesed has always been a part of each one of our communities. And I think that during the pandemic, I can speak for myself, but I'm sure it's similar for each of you, that we have really institutionalized chesed, helping others. We figured out a way to do that, whether it's a WhatsApp chat, an email list, whether it's congregants who are calling, going through the membership list and calling and reaching out to people. And to me, that has been a gift that I hope we will continue to take with us back to the normal times. The ability to motivate our community, to continue to motivate them to do that kind of chesed. Okay, that's for me.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rabbi Polikoff.
Rabbi Stecker, go for it.
All right, I will. So this whole notion of the importance of Kiddush. So, just a week ago, services finished. We were inside. We were also streaming inside our sanctuary. And somebody came up to me afterward and said, just being together to pray was so extraordinary. Just hearing your words, Rabbi, were so inspirational that I don't even need Kiddush at all. And at that moment, I woke up and I realized this was just a very sweet little dream that I was having, and then I got out of bed and went about my day. So you're absolutely right, Rabbi Polikoff. We speak about the synagogue being Beit Tefillah, a house of prayer, Beit Midrash, a house of study, but the term that we most use is Beit Knesset, which means the place where we gather. And in Sephardi communities, the word Kenisa is used. So you take a whole group of people and tell them what we're going to take away from you is your ability to talk with each other and your ability to eat together. And it's devastating. So we need to do our best to try to figure that out and to try to move in that direction in ways that are safe. I also just want to observe just on the practical level that we have really tried to maintain our Shabbat services for families. And recently we opened up just outside in this outdoor tent open on all sides that we have. I know other synagogues have it as well, for our Tat Shabbat for families with preschoolers, because we just realize how incredibly important that is. And we're going to see if we can even slowly introduce ways for people to just have a bite, whether it's grab and go or just creative ways for us to be safe, but also recognize the importance of Beit Knesset. So I just want to observe, we said this last year too, many people are saying when this is over, we're going to be different. We're going to be more sensitive. We're going to be more mindful of each other. We're not going to have larger samachot than we think we should. We're not going to be concerned about things that are peripheral. We're going to be concerned just about the things that matter. And I think to some extent that's true, but again, I look to our ancestors who decided that they were going to use the experience of being in Egypt as an inspiration for them to be more sensitive and to be more mindful. That was not the only lesson you could derive from having been in Egypt. You could have said, I was in Egypt, get yourself out of Egypt. God got me out, pray to your God, and see how it happens. And that's not what our ancestors chose. They chose to take an experience of vulnerability and pain and turn it into an inspiration for acting responsibly and compassionately. And so my thought about all of this is that things will change if we are vigilant about ensuring that they change, that we continue to call people, that we continue to use technology in the most outreaching and uplifting ways. And the other thing also that is not going to change so quickly, people imagined, well, we're not seeing each other so much in person. So maybe some of the hatred and the animosity, anti-Semitism and racism and other forms of bigotry, maybe they'll just subside. I don't believe they did. I don't believe any of the forms of hatred subsided. I think people used virtual means to express that hatred. And now that we're gathering in person, people are using in-person means. So that has not changed. But I do hope that we will find ways to be vigilant when we are the objects of discrimination and when other people are the objects of discrimination. So on the personal, when it comes to our synagogue gatherings and when it comes to our communal, I hope that we will do our best to try to institute the kinds of adaptations and changes, not just in logistics, but also in approach and in vision that we realize we all need.
Thank you. That's very meaningful, Rabbi Stecker. Let's see. So the question, what do you think will be different moving forward? So I'm not going to offer a prediction. I want to sort of offer a prayer. And I want to connect my prayer, as it were. I'm going to share a little bit of a text. I'm cheating Rabbis Stecker and Polikoff because I've always felt like what we should be doing is just learning a text together. So I'm gonna do a tiny bit of that. But I want to
Can
connect.
I guess, Rabbi? Can I guess if it's going to be Talmud or Lady Gaga? Can we do like over under?
I'm so
Sorry,
clueless,
go ahead.
Lady Gaga, but I loved your reference. I loved your reference. But, you know, Rabbi Polakov, you talked about community in the synagogue as the mothership. Did you say something, some version of that? Both of you rabbis spoke about, you know, the loss that we experience and we feel from not having a Kiddush that we can fully be at. I want to frame what I'm thinking about, like, you know, the Kiddush, the services, the coming together. The goal of it is to build community, but it actually, you know, I think we all agree that somehow it's there. The goal, a goal, if not the goal, is our connection with God. And so I want to bring a text that is not from the parsha that we're about to begin reading, Rabbi Polakov, as I'm grateful for you doing that. I want to actually speak of a text that was from this past Shabbat that we read yesterday. And if I may, I'm going to share the screen. I'm going to scare you all for a moment, rabbis, but I think only for a moment. No, that's not what's going to scare you. Before I give you my abbreviated version, I want to share with you that this is a text. What I've prepared is from the Netivot Shalom, Paths of Peace, Parsha Tazria, and the Netivot Shalom was a 20th century, brilliant, beautiful, contemporary Hasidic teacher. He says, "Shekola misaper lashon hara negaim ba'in alav." So the subject is, I think all of us would agree that occasionally at the Shabbos Kiddush, there's a little bit of gossip that happens. I mean, not at your synagogues or ours, but at the other synagogues in Great Neck, there's a little bit of lashon hara that happens. And so I want to just do a little bit of it to an offering of the Netivot Shalom's, you know, incredible teaching on lashon hara. And so he says that anyone who speaks lashon hara is going to bring negaim, plague, blemishes onto himself or herself. It has three impacts. I would look at two things. One is, what are the effects of lashon hara on me, the speaker? And then we're going to look at what he says about what's the effect of lashon hara on God. So first effect is that I'm going to have some blemish. I'm going to somehow experience and manifest a little bit of a plague that is a result of the gossip that I offer. Second effect is kol misaper lashon hara ilu kofer bikar. Each of us actually becomes a kofer, a heretic, according to the Netivot Shalom. We become a heretic from our gossip. That's an incredible idea to put forward. That by gossiping about our neighbor who might be in my synagogue, but might not be in my synagogue, my neighbor who doesn't know anything about Shabbat, or my neighborhood who's so unbelievably obsessive about his or her, we become, in this teaching, a heretic, which obviously is a very dangerous and none of us want to be seen as heretics, I think. So that's the second impact of lashon hara. Third, kol misaper lashon hara, says God, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, ein ani v'hu yecholim lador ba'olam. God says to any of us who gossip, you and I cannot live together. So whether I'm the intense spiritualist, always seeking God, or on the intense Shomer Mitzvah person who's going to dot every halachic I and cross every halachic T, the moment we speak lashon hara, God's not in the same world that I'm in. It's a pretty unbelievable proposition. Last thing I'll do for this moment is to share what happens, the impacts of our lashon hara on God. And this same text says, misaper lashon hara sheyotzer perud. You create a division, a barrier, a boundary, a wall, ben Yehudim. V'gorem bazet sa'ar lemala. So we create this boundary, and what's the impact on God? It creates sa'ar for God, incredible grief. God is grieving every time we create a barrier between one side of Old Mill Road and another, between Steamboat Road and Old Mill Road, between Middle Neck. We create a barrier, and we bring to God grief. I'm not making a prediction. I'm just offering a prayer as we move out of this COVID world, or whatever the next stage is, that we somehow take seriously the teaching of the Nitivot Shalom, recognize the dangerous and damaging impact on ourselves and the profound impact on God. Before we close, I'm going to share one last thought, like how do we fix this? But for now, I'll stop.
Okay. We want to leave time for Q&A too. So I think, these texts about, maybe stop sharing.
Oh yeah, sorry.
These texts about the nature of gossip and its pernicious effect. I'm just thinking, like, the whole feeling of this dialogue, and we've done many over the years, and they've been spirited and sharp and uplifting and a whole range of things. But I feel this year like a deeper common vulnerability and common humanity. So I'm hoping that we can move forward holding on to that. We've all said this from our pulpits and in our private conversations, but we need each other now, whether it's the medical research or the healthcare professionals or the frontline workers, or just the discipline of putting on a mask, even if it feels socially awkward or logistically complicated. So that kind of, my other text simpler is chavruta o mituta. We're either connected to each other as chaverim, as friends, or we die. And I think that has been underscored so profoundly, certainly in terms of the spiritual lives of our communities, we need each other, but in terms of between our communities, as Mayor was just pointing out. So that was a lot of rabbinic talk. I want to move to a good maybe 10 minutes of Q&A, giving Matt the difficult task of bundling and relaying questions our way, and we can catch them and respond as we will. So.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you all again for your wonderful comments. I am, culling through the many interesting questions and comments. I see kind of two kind of groups. One, I will start with, there are a number of questions about going forward, and this idea of coming out of COVID at the synagogue level. And this idea, someone framed it very well, the idea that Jews have for centuries, for millennia, have been forced, quote unquote, forced to adapt to situations around them, going back to, of course, the destruction of the temple and changing our whole way of living and our Jewish lives. So with that in mind, not to be so dramatic, but with that in mind, how do we look back at synagogue life, and yet at the same time, with the new technologies available, how do we let's say prioritize, or how do we re-envision sanctuary life going forward? And I guess maybe we'll start again with Rabbi Polikoff and just go around in that way.
Okay, Matt, thanks for the question. I think that some of that we've covered in our talk about how we see synagogue life continuing out of the pandemic, and I think that for us as an Orthodox synagogue in Great Neck, we grapple with some of the halachic challenges of incorporating technology into our lives on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and we grapple with some of the halachic challenges of incorporating technology into our lives on other days. I think that we don't just say people are not coming to shul, so we're gonna open up our shuls on Shabbos or Yom Tov with technology. yes, that's true that you could probably get many more people and accommodate many more people by doing that. But you're also, at least from my perspective, you are missing, a basic value that continues despite the pandemic, which is our commitment to a system of law, not a static system of law, not an unchanging system of law. There's probably never been a period of more creative rabbinic halachic decision-making. And I'm talking certainly from an Orthodox perspective, but I imagine for others as well, as this time, as during this pandemic. Pages and pages and pages of responsa literature, of shilos and shuvos, about what we can do, what we can't do. And it's really been an extraordinary vision into the strength of halacha and the strength of the creative element of how halacha rises to the occasion of some of the challenges that we face. So as I said before, I think certainly from a class perspective, a program perspective, a shiur perspective, Zoom is here to stay. But from a sanctuary perspective, at least on our part of Old Mill Road, we're actually looking forward to the day when Zoom disappears and we're only in person.
I mean,
So
I think
I'll
I see
go
it.
ahead. Go ahead, Rabbi Tara.
Really?
No,
Okay,
go ahead.
jump in quickly. I sort of see myself leaning two ways, in sort of in part because as a Reform Jew, liberated from or some of the constrictions, many of the constrictions halachically, the reach, I'm thinking in particular of high holidays, the way we had, the Torah text illuminated for all to see as people are doing aliyot that have been pre-recorded or processing with the name of the loved one who's passed away in honor of whom their hakafa is. There was all this incredible creativity that enabled such a broad reach. And I feel so excited by that and grateful for it. Also very humbled by how to do that in a hybrid way, but that's another question. So feeling the learning and the ritual possibility, there's that piece. And then there's this other piece on Friday night. We were here in the main sanctuary, socially distanced with masks, and feeling the irreplaceable sanctity of in-person. And how do we're creatures of habit. We've been weaned of that. How do we get over the hump of that fear to re-enter and to be in this sacred space for which there is no replacement for that? I'm also, one of my passions has been the building up of small groups. We call them tribes, people meeting in person outside the synagogue, how essential those meetings will be. So I sort of feel myself pulling in two directions. How can we lean in more and creatively and beyond our wildest imagination to the Zoom pieces, hybrid or otherwise? And how can we bring people back? And it's going to be a process. So go ahead, Rabbi Stecker.
So I'm going to jump in. So person is on a flight, an El Al flight to Israel. So just try to imagine it. Okay. If you haven't done it, soon, God willing, and it's time for dinner, the flight attendant comes over to the passenger and says it's dinner time, and the passenger says, what are my choices? And the flight attendant says yes or no. So yes or no are not the only choices that we want necessarily. I am sensing, and I know that I myself feel a desire for yes and yes. So first of all, I just want to say that the conservative movement is committed to halacha, often takes a more open view than exists within the range of orthodoxy, and there is a range within the conservative movement as well. And there was striving, and there were teshuvot that were written about the use of electronics in certain circumstances. So I just want to put that out there. Having said that, I also want to say that yes and yes would be the ideal. Yes to breaking down the barriers and having a more national and even international kihila for our congregation, but also yes to the intimacy, because the localness of a synagogue is also something which is very special. And truly, and I don't think I'm exaggerating. I mean, if our ancestors sat amidst the rubble of the Beit HaMikdash, of the Holy Temple when it was destroyed. And, not in that moment, over time, organically created an approach to Judaism that would maintain the essence of temple Judaism, but do it through new means and in response to new circumstances. That's what we're going to have to do. And I'm feeling actually very charged and very energized, despite having shared some of the depletions that I've been feeling, that we can do that we can find ways to have the blessings of the local and the in-person, and also to be able to embrace some of the blessings of people, including, by the way, that we've had people being able to say Kaddish across time zones, across generations together. There's something that was expressed by those people as having been very fulfilling. So as hard as it is, I think that this is an opportunity for us to figure out how we can have yes and yes moving forward.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Want to throw
Very-
another question at us, Matt?
Sure. So let's see. A congregant raised this the fact that the COVID virus has certainly let's say exposed the hardships and the struggles that not only we go through in our own lives, but certainly in the lives of many in our own community. Our friends and neighbors, both Jewish and non-Jewish, have really have suffered greatly. So is there, coming out of the COVID crisis, is there perhaps a new way, a reimagining of our role as Jews in the community to help our fellow neighbors, Jewish and non-Jewish?
I don't know if we all want to chime in for each one. So
I'm sorry.
Matt, I'm sorry if you didn't finish. I apologize.
No, that's it. I was just going to say, please go ahead.
Okay. So my answer is a resounding yes. I think that this pandemic has exposed vulnerabilities that were always there, but maybe augmented by the pandemic. We actually have a drop-off that's taking place with collaboration of a number of the synagogues in Great Neck. The drop-off is taking place in Temple Israel right now, but it has taken place in other places. Opportunities for people safely to be able to drop off just non-perishables or other items that are of use. And I hope that we're going to continue to collaborate. We have said, by the way, in the past, other dialogues, that that chesed is something that we really can collaborate on. There are seldom issues that come up that are ideological, that prevent one synagogue from joining with another synagogue to do a kind of response, charitable outreach response. So I hope that those will continue. And that will step them up. And I also just want to say and express my gratitude. Some of these initiatives have been brought to us by members of the community, not by clergy. People who have just said, I read about something, or I'm involved with an organization. This is something that we should be doing. I think that's true in each of our synagogues. And God bless you. I mean, tavo alechem bracha, to continue to do that and to motivate us to be part of these initiatives.
It was on Thursday, I got a Happy Yom Ha'atzmaut message from Bertha over at St. Al's, with whom we do the Interfaith Food Pantry, and just thinking about the meaning and impact and necessity of our local collaborations being ever more important. And I also feel excited that with our Kulanu school, working with Temple Israel students, we're doing a lot of chesed together, and that just makes us stronger, and we share our resources, and it's just never been more urgent.
I'd like to, if I can, go back to something that Rabbi Meir mentioned at the very beginning. When we always sit to plan these rabbinic dialogues, and we struggle with, what's the theme going to be? What are we going to talk about? Are people tuning in, for one particular reason or another? They want to see fireworks. They want to see rainbows. They want to see, kumbaya, what do they want to see? and we struggle with that. And obviously, I think we as a group have felt that over the last year and this year, we wanted to focus on, a very personal and community-oriented discussion about the pandemic. But Rabbi Meir mentioned at the very beginning that, that as we come out of this pandemic, we have a lot of other issues to talk about. We have the issue of anti-Semitism, which I got a text message from one of my congregants who's obviously watching, who said, "I'm so disappointed that you're not talking about anti-Semitism." And, to a certain extent, there's obviously a limit to what we can talk about, but to a certain extent, he's right. Right? Anti-Semitism is increasing dangerously around the world and in our own world. But it's not just anti-Semitism. We live in a growing Asian community, and the anti-Asian sentiment, which is, which we're reading about, which is gripping the society in which we're living, the racism, which is pervasive in society, that we need to address those issues. And yes, I think it's important that we discuss the kinds of things that we've discussed this year and last year, but I also think it's important that we turn our attention back to some of these fundamental flaws in society that need to be addressed.
I really appreciate what you just offered, Rabbi Polikoff. And if I may, I want to just do one last connect a whole bunch of dots, but to conclude this text that I opened or I shared 15 minutes ago about the dangers of Lashon Hara. And because the Netivot Shalom actually has an answer. So how do you fix it? And I want to frame it that, part of our conversation today earlier was, the gifts of virtual, the problems of virtual, not all the consequences of not being together, and how do we do it, and all these practical choices that we're making, and maybe we disagree, but maybe we accept. And I think the Netivot Shalom is saying to us, whatever the practical decisions you make, there's actually a deeper energy, a deeper heart-driven experience that should be defining what it means to be a Jew. And so the Netivot Shalom said, he has this beautiful idea that both the study of Torah and Shabbat are the answer. And it's way too long to get it to talk about the details of this. But I want to just share a few tiny statements he makes that form the content, the essence of how to repair the damage that we do when we gossip, when we do Lashon Hara. And he says that Ohevet Makom, in order for you to be a lover of God, Makom, you must Ohevet Briot. You've got to really love life, living creatures. You can't pretend to love God if you actually treat other human beings poorly. He says the koach of the power of Torah study, it's so amazing that it can activate for a Jew le'ehov.
That's very interesting. That's our fire alarm or our something alarm.
We're hoping it's a false alarm, Rabbi Tara.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a false alarm.
You guys, all good?
All is well.
Or-
You can keep that thought.
Yeah,
Okay.
the power of
Or all good enough, I think is.
Rabbi Meir, you're on fire, literally on fire.
That's it.
I activated.
Exactly.
Sorry, I apologize, but this
Al ha'esh.
it's so relevant. The power, the koach HaTorah, poel b'yudi, activate. Studying Torah is supposed to activate in a Jew le'ehov kol echad miYisrael. So all of us, whether we're liberal and spiritualist studying Torah, or whether we're really from the point and the aspiration and the potential of studying Torah is that we're going to love every single person from Israel, every Jew. Lastly, he says this, Mani mevakesh mikem, that the Netivot Shalom is channeling his understanding of God, shetiyu ohavin zeh, that you will love each other. He goes on, michabdin zeh that you will honor, lechabed, you will honor each other. And then he says, finally, ein yecholim lehagia, it's impossible to arrive at a state of unity, yichud im hakadosh baruch hu, with God, ella ka'asher yesh yichud beYehudim. You simply cannot have a unity with God. Mr. Jew, Mrs. Jew, from Jew, spiritual Jew, unless you have a unity with other Jews. And so whatever our choice, the choices of our synagogue, the Reform synagogue, the Conservative synagogue, the Orthodox synagogue, I think there is a profound energy and emotional, aspirational goal and obligation that we should place upon ourselves, which is all of our programming at the synagogues. The point of it is to figure out how to love and lechabed the other Jews, because when we do that, we're going to be able to love the Asians. We're going to be able to love people of black and brown skin. Loving each other is the ingredient that will enable us to be loving human beings of all varieties, of any kind, to the maximum potential. So,
And maybe that's a plug to come to the rally next Sunday, 12:30, which is the unity, really standing out against hate against our Asian neighbors, and standing together as Jews and as community members. I'm going to take us home because an hour and 15 minutes is enough Zoom. We're on the we're on the 21st day of the Omer. This is concluding this week. We've been thinking about Tiferet. Who knows what Tiferet means? So many mystical meanings, beauty, but this idea that it's maybe a combination of compassion and strength, chesed and gevura. When we can be strong and we can also be really coming from the heart, we can get to that place of Tiferet. Today actually is Malchut Sheba Tiferet, dignity in compassion, dignity in beauty. So thank you for coming this morning. May we leave this dialogue with an added charge to bring dignity to each and every human life, to our own life, dignity to our differences, and a sense of nobility and grandeur and hope for what the future can hold as Klal Yisrael, as humanity. And it's a blessing to be here this morning.
thank you all.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Chazak u'Baruch. Thanks, everyone.
Next
And
year,
thanks, Temple Beth-El again.
we're on next year?
Bagels,
Bagels, absolutely. Bagels.
but not on styrofoam.
Okay.
Okay.
Bagels on
Yes,
reconstituted
yes, ma'am.
bamboo.
Okay.
All right.
Everyone, have a
Thanks,
great day.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
It's
It's
wonderful.
always uplifting.
Amen.